Welcome, everybody. I'm John Wally, and today we're going to be talking about how to flash Tenable OT appliances. Now, there's several reasons we may be doing this. It could be because we have a corrupted system. It may be because we want to go back to a factory reset, or it could be because simply we're upgrading between one operating system to another, because there's been several changes with Tenable over the years, especially when we focus on Tenable OT. For an example, we've gone from the Red Hat Atomic operating system, we've moved over to CentOS, and then from CentOS, recently Tenable's gone to Oracle Linux 8 with the end of support for CentOS. So sometimes it's easier to just do a fresh rebuild and then restore our data instead of going through and trying to, fix the underlying operating system and then try to get it so there are applications there. It can be a little buggy. There are some scripts out there to do that, but we're going to show you how to flash this system, start originally from the code that's in there so that have a really clean start on hardware. So this isn't for your ESXi instances or your virtual instances. This is for hardware. So let's go ahead and jump in. So first and foremost, let's talk about what you're going to need and what the physical interface looks like. So Tenable OT Core Appliance has several ports on the front of it. So we'll start from the left and we're going to move our way over. So the very first thing is you're going to have this really small power indicator light, and that's on the far left. It's at the kind of the top front. You'll kind of see where our image there is on the slide. And anytime you have power, that light will be on. If you're turning your switch on and that light's not coming on, you know that you have some kind of power supply problem that's going on. The second thing that you'll see is there's a console port, and it looks like a regular Ethernet port in a lot of ways, but it's much like the Cisco RJ45 console cables. So that very first port that looks like an Ethernet jack, that's an RJ45, is actually a console port. And you'll notice because a little plastic clip of your Cat5 cable actually points up instead of down. The one that points up is your console port, where if you look at your other four RJ45 ports, those are Ethernet, and that little clip points down. So just remember that your console port's the one the farthest to the left. It's separated by USB ports, and then you have your four Ethernet ports on the front of the appliance. If you look really close, down near the bottom of that console port, you'll see this little tiny hole that's in there, and that is for a reset. You cannot do a factory reset with like a lot of appliances where you'll boot and hold that down. That does not work. All that really does is a reboot. So if you were to get a little paperclip in there or something, you hit that, it would reboot the system. If it was hung, there's really no reason to ever use that. On the back of the appliance, you'll actually have a power cable and a rocker power switch. So the way that rocker power switch works is if you rock it and hold it down, it'll do a hard shutdown. If you rock it just one time, it'll do a reboot. And the same thing for turning it on, you're just going to rock it one time and it will turn the system on. So it's a little spring-loaded switch on the back that's like a toggle switch. It looks like it's on and off, but it's actually a rocker, and it'll go back to its original position when you press it. All right, so that's it for the physical interface. So let's talk about what hardware you're going to need. So you're going to need, of course, the Tenable Core Appliance itself. On top of that, you're going to need an RJ45 to USB or USB-C console cable. And you'll see a picture of the one that I have. I really like this one. I've used it out in the field. It works great. I do USB-C because a lot of times I switch between a PC-based laptop or a Mac-based laptop. This team seems to work with both of those, so I use the one that's a USB-C to RJ45 console cable. The other thing you'll need is a USB thumb drive. It needs to be at least 8 gigabits. Now, you can probably get away with something that's a little smaller, but you don't want to go much less than that. The actual ISO is almost close to 4 gigs, and then when it expands, it's going to go up, and they don't sell 5 gig or 6 gig thumb drives. So I would have it at least be an 8 gigabit thumb drive for the install. And then the last thing you'll need is an actual Ethernet cable, Cat 6, Cat 5, that works. A little jumper cable is fine. All you want that for is to make sure that your interface is up and running and we can truly get to a setup module. On top of the hardware that you'll need software. So of course, to restore this, you're going to have the Tenable OT security offline ISO. Now we're going to walk through all of this in our presentation, but I wanted you to have it in a set of slides too, where you can see this, present it, and then we walk through it, you kind of see this step by step. So you're going to actually need to download the ISO, and you can get that from downloads.tenable.com. You're also going to need a tool like PuTTY that's going to allow you to connect to a serial connection. Now, this is everything I'm walking through is how to do this if you're doing this on a Windows-based system. If you're using Linux, there's some other ways you can do this. If you have questions, put it in the comments below, and I'll be happy to do one doing this on Mac OS or doing this on Linux as well. But for Windows, PuTTY and Rufus are the additions of what you'll need. You'll be using Rufus to build the thumb drive so it'll boot off of it, and PuTTY you'll be using to connect to your serial port. All right, so after we do that, we have to prepare our thumb drive. And when we prepare our drive, we're going to take that downloaded image, we're going to install and run Rufus. We'll install that thumb drive, we'll make sure that it is seeing it the right way, and then we're going to select in that section the Tenable OT Offline Security ISO. We're going to select Start, and that's going to kick that off, and you're going to have a little pop-up window that shows up. And that pop-up window, you're going to change from the default write in ISO image mode to write in DD image mode, and you're going to say OK. Once we do that, we're going to prepare PuTTY. That'll finish. You're going to say OK. You'll remove your drive from your system. You'll make sure that PuTTY is running. So you're going to want to download and install PuTTY if it isn't already installed on your system. You're going to connect that console cable from your computer to the appliance in that console cable port. Once you do that, you're going to notice in Device Manager that you'll have ports, COM and LPT will show up, and it'll give you a COM number. It'll say something like USB serial port COM3, and you'll see that in the image in the slide. That's important. You want to remember what COM number that is. Then we're going to configure PuTTY to talk to the device over that console cable. So we're going to open up PuTTY, and when we set it up, we're going to say that we want to talk over COM. In this instance, we're going to say we want to be in COM3. We want our speed to be 115/200. And then when you go in the specific serial settings, you want to make sure you set your flow control to none. Now, I know this is a lot of information, but we'll walk through this step by step. All right, once you have all that set up and you're good to go, you want to boot the system. So we're going to insert the thumb drive. We're going to put it in the USB port 1. We're going to rock that power button that we talked about. It's on the back of the device. And as soon as we hear a beep in the system, this thing's going to take off, and it's going to sound like a jet taking off when you first do it. It's really loud. That jet sound's going to like even out, the fans are going to slow down, and you're going to hear a beep. When you hear that beep, you want to start spamming that delete button because that's going to get us into our BIOS. When we get to our BIOS, we're going to go to the section that says save and exit, and down towards the bottom of that, there's going to be an override. And in that override, for that boot override, you're going to set that you want to do a thumb drive boot. So you're going to go down to your device. You're going to select that for your boot, and then you're going to let the system run. You're going to walk away for 30 minutes, and the system will all self-install. Now, there's one little piece in the boot piece that's not in the slide that I'm going to tell you about, and you'll see in here. When it boots up, if you want to go through and watch that whole configuration and that install, instead of doing the graphical install, the regular install, you want to go down through that menu and select TTY-S0. And you'll see that when we walk through, and then you just let the system go. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so you should see on my screen now a device. And the first thing I'm going to call out in this device, it should be down in the left-hand corner of this video. is you'll see that it's blue, it's not black like our image before, and you'll also notice that it has the word Indigy on it. So to give a little bit of history on this before we boot everything and get everything going, the first thing to call out in here is that Indigy was bought by Tenable about 4.5 years ago. And one of the reasons they were selected because of their great ability to do their active queries. And we'll have a whole another set of videos just on active queries. But in general, they bought it because it was really leading the market in how it talked to industrial equipment out in the field. And it was kind of like one of the better ones when it was talking over proprietary protocols and that kind of thing. So I know it says Indigy. I promise you, this is the same device that you got if you purchased it from Tenable. The branding's a little bit different. The box is a different color, but both boxes are built by Lanner and have the exact same specs. So this is the exact box that you'll get, even though the branding looks a little bit different. All right. So the first thing we need to do is go download our information from Tenable. So we need to go out to our download site and download our image. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up a browser and we're going to go to downloads.tenable.com. All right. So we're going to go down to Tenable Core. And under Tenable Core, you're going to see that we have a Tenable Core plus Tenable OT OL8. You're going to want to download the offline version. So when that happens, you're going to click and you're going to download that file. Now, I've already done this to speed up the video, but I wanted you to see how to go through, where to get that, and what file that you're actually going to download. Now that we have our system downloaded, what we want to do is actually set it up so that we can burn that flash drive we talked about. So the first thing we want to do is bring up Rufus. And so I'm going to go here. I've already downloaded it, but if you can do a search on Google and download Rufus. So Rufus is a tool that helps us install ISOs onto flash drives. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my thumb drive. And you will see that the no label, yours may have a label, but it says my drive is 64 gigs. And if you hover over it, it'll actually tell you what it is. So you can see that mine is a SanDisk USB device, and it's about 64, 57.8. I'm going to go in and select my ISO from my downloads. So don't be confused. If you do the drop down here, it's going to say select or download. So you don't want to do the little drop down arrow. You want to actually select. If we do that, it's going to let us go to our drives. We're going to select our offline image and we're going to say open. So now we have our thumb drive identified, we have our ISO file identified. All we have to do is click Start. When we click Start, we're going to have that pop-up menu that we talked about in the slides, and we're going to change this from write to ISO to write in DD image mode. Now this is important because an ISO may skip a bit here or there. If you do a DD image mode, it writes bit by bit to the disk, and that's just a safer way of doing it. It might work if you do the ISO image mode. I know it says recommended. The DD is slower, but it's also less chance that you're going to have problems in the write of the image over to your flash drive. So I'm going to select OK. It's going to give me a warning that all my data is going to be deleted. If you have an important data on that, now's the time to pull it off, back it up before you use that flash drive. I'm going to say that's okay. And it's going to start deleting my partitions and it's going to write to my disk. All right. When your drive finishes writing and that image has been completely put over onto that drive, you will get the status of ready. Once we see that green ready, we can hit close and we can remove our thumb drive from our system. All right, so that's the first step. We're all set on that side. Now, the second thing we need to do is set up a way for us to talk to the device. So in order to do that, we want to grab a console cable. And I can show you an image of my console cable here. So what I'm using here is a regular Cisco console cable. It's RJ45 to USB-C. Now this one works really well. It already has USB drivers, the UART drivers, and that sort of stuff for Windows systems. So it's a little bit easier to use than some of the other ones. One of the things you want to make sure, whether you get the USB-C or the USB regular, the A's, either one that you want to go is you want to make sure that you're not using an adapter in that. Every once in a while, I've seen where adapters do funny things. Now, I've used one from USB-C to regular USB, and it seems to work fine. But I have seen issues if you're trying to use something like a DB9 to USB or RJ45 to DB9. I've seen some significant issues on that side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in my console cable into the console port. So I'm going to add this to the port that's the farthest left on my device, as you can see in the image down below. The second thing I want to do is plug in my actual USB portion to my laptop. And I'm going to go ahead and plug that in as well. All right, we'll kind of pull some of these cables out of the way, and then we want to open our PuTTY program. So I'm going to say PuTTY, we'll open this up, and we're going to go ahead and start some of our configurations here. So the first thing I want to do is switch from SSH over to serial, because we're going to be connecting over a serial connection. Then I need to give it some information. The first thing it's going to ask me what serial line. Well, I don't necessarily know. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's COM3. We don't know. So how do we find out? Well, if we go to our Windows button and we go and open our device manager. In our device manager, we can go down and look for ports, and it'll say ports COM and LPT. If I open this up, you'll see this serial port connection and it's telling me it's on COM3. Now, just so you can see this, I'm going to unplug this to make sure it's actually the right thing that I'm seeing. I'm going to unplug my device. So now I just unplugged my console cable and you see it went away. If I plug it back in, you'll see it pop back up, and I know that that's the right serial device. That's the right USB device. So I know it's COM3 based on this information. So I'm going to go change this from COM1 to COM3, and I'm going to change my speed. My speed's going to be 115,200. All right, now this portion is done. The last thing we want to do is go down to the area that we see serial. I'm going to click on serial. You'll see it already has our COM3, it already has our speed. I want to change the flow control. Under flow control, I want to change this to none. Once that's done, I can open my connection. And you'll see we have our PuTTY terminal up and running. I'm going to close some of this out so that we can see it. And I'm going to make this a little bit larger on our screen. There we go. Now, at this point, because we haven't turned the system on, we're not going to see anything but this little green bar up the top because we don't have any data coming across our console cable yet. But before we're ready to get data going, the next thing we need to do is put in our USB drive. So we're going to insert our USB drive that we just burned into the USB port 1. And if you don't know which one that is, that's the top one. Now this will work on the top one or the bottom one, but they read them in order. So we want to put it in the top one first when we're looking for somewhere for the system to boot or looking for a drive. Now the next thing we want to do is turn the power on. So on the very back of the box, there's a rocker switch, and that rocker switch is right beside the power cord. So if you reach back, you can feel the power cord as to just the right of the power cord, and all you have to do is bump that switch. Now it's going to be very loud here. And it's going to sound a little bit like an airplane taking off. And I'm going to try to edit out as much of that as I can in the video, so it's not just over too loud and you can't hear me talking. So I'm waiting to hear a beep. So that sound's going to go down. I'll hear a beep, and I'm going to start hitting my delete key over and over. And the reason why is I want to get into the BIOS of the machine. We heard the beep, and I started spamming the delete button. And there we see the delete or escape, and we are into the BIOS. If you miss this, if it goes by too fast, you can always go back, hit reboot, and try it again. The next thing we're going to use is our arrow keys, and we're going to go over to the right, all the way to save and exit. If I hit my down arrow now, you'll see I have a section called Boot Override. I'm going to want to go to the UEFI partition. Now, yours may not be called the same thing. I'm running a SanDisk to do this on. That's who makes my thumb drive. Yours may have a different name. It may be an unknown name if there's not like some random organization or company made that thumb drive. But what you're really looking for is this UEFI kind of beginning to that disk, and you'll know that that's the right one. I'm going to go down and select that, and I'm just going to hit enter. That's all I have to do is hit the enter button. Once that comes up, I'm going to get a menu. Pretty quickly, you need to use your up and down arrows to select these. Because you don't have a monitor port, so we can't plug in a monitor to this to kind of work our way through it, the way that we get any of the display is through our console cable. So we, instead of just saying we want to install Tenable Core like we did in previous videos where we're doing it on in a virtual environment where we get a monitor and those kind of things, or if you're one of the Tenable bigger like XL appliances, you can hook up a monitor on those. But for the LANer appliance, you have to do everything through console. So what you want to do is go down and select Tenable Core using a serial console TTY-S0. And you're just going to hit enter here. Once that happens, you want to make sure that that system's going to boot up. So you want to watch it. It's going to take a few seconds to read the drive, and then it'll start booting off of that flash drive. And it looks like we're getting a good boot up as it starts to install the system. At this point, it's going to take the system about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less. Maybe you'll get a little bit lucky and it doesn't take quite so long, but it's usually about 30 minutes. The way this is going to work is you got your starting installer. So we're in a good point. Once that installer starts going, it's going to install until it gets to a reboot. It's going to reboot the system. It's going to do a few more things. It will reboot the system again, and it's going to do some more stuff. And then you're going to get a login prompt. And I'm going to say this multiple times with this video. Do not do anything at that login prompt. It's going to look like everything's finished. It's not. It will take almost 6 minutes for that system to continue after you get that. All right. And then you'll see it start installing some more stuff. You know you will be done when two things happen. Your system does a full shutdown and that power light that's green right now that you see turns off. So I'm going to go away for like 20 minutes. We're going to fast forward everything through. I'll continue watching this so you can see it go through, but all of that will be very fast forwarded so you don't have to sit and wait for 30 minutes for this video to end. And then we'll come back with a reboot and show you how to check to make sure that your system fully installed. All right, here's our first reboot. We're starting that reboot sequence. Now we fast forward and we played at about 10 seconds, what took about 20 minutes to get to. So just realize if you're waiting a long time, it's going through this process. We're about 20 minutes into the install and we saw our first reboot. Now sometimes it'll go a little bit faster, sometimes a little slower depending on the version that you have. But typically it's about the same. You can expect somewhere between 15, maybe 20 minutes before you get to that first reboot. So now you'll see that our system will start up again and we're going to go through the process all over, we should be getting something like Oracle Linux. Now our OS is installed, and now we're going to continue to do some special configurations on the back end, and all of this is automated as well. Now we're at our second reboot, and as you see, this one goes pretty fast. So we did our first reboot. Now we're already into sequencing for our second reboot. So you can expect your second reboot to come pretty quickly. You're going to see some things in here like failed to remount, failed to mount, or whatever, and then you'll see some forces if you continue to read. Don't worry about that too much. That's just some D-message stuff that triggers the system to act in different ways. So now we've just wrapped up our second reboot and we're going into the system booting up for the really the last time before a shutdown. And I know I talked about this before. You're going to get to a segment here and it's going to be unnerving. So we're seeing our system boot up. And once it boots up, we're going to come to a login screen. And in most implementations, especially if we're on the virtual side, once we get this login prompt, it means we're good. We can log in. The system's finished. That's not true in Tenable OT when you're installing this on hardware. So it's very important though, even though we get this login screen that you see right here, you're gonna wait somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes. And I know that sounds like a really long time. It kind of depends. Like I've seen this happen as soon as 2 or 3 minutes, but you want to hang tight. It looks like the system is done. You get your system restricted warning and you get a login. And typically we think we put, okay, great, we can put in wizard and admin. Do not do it. Just let the system sit. I promise you it will continue. You're going to let this system run until it completely shuts down. In the console, you're going to see that there's a shutdown signal. So it's going to say reboot shutdown instead of just reboot. You'll see that there's a shutdown sequence there, and your power light will actually go off. When your power light goes off, that's when you're good. Everything's installed. You can unhook your cables, you can get everything done, you can bolt up everything in the rack, and you'll be ready to go. So we'll fast forward through this section as well, so you don't have to wait the whole 6 minutes for us to start doing our installation and shutdown. I'll come back when we get into that shutdown segment. And now we can see it doing its thing where we're doing some final configurations. So this is what I was saying. You're going to have to take a little while. I promise it will start. You're going to see it starting to unmount, and it's going to go ahead and shut down the system. And we see this reboot power down. We notice that all the background noise went away. And if we look closely, our little power indicator light right here is now off. So the system is completely turned off. All right, so how do we know we got a good configuration? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is disconnect everything. So I'm going to close out my putty window. I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to remove my flash drive. And I'm going to get set up so that we can go ahead and start checking to make sure that our system is truly ready to be set up. So I'm going to connect an Ethernet cable to my device. And I'm going to plug into our Ethernet port number 1. I'm going to bring up my networking in my device. So one of the ways that you can do this is go into your control panel. So I'm going to say control panel. And you may not have the small icons here. You may have something that looks like categories. If you just go into the small icons, we're going to go into networking. And we're going to look at our different Ethernet connections. So we have several here. I'm going to go to change adapter settings. This is going to give me a window that's often hard to find. So because I'm running things like virtual machines and all that sort of stuff, I know what Ethernet port I'm looking for. I'm going to double click on Ethernet 1. Yours may be something different, but if you hover over these, you can kind of see what they are. So the first one I'm going to look at, you can see that this is actually my real Ethernet adapter. I have a USB adapter on my machine. I also have here VirtualBox. So you want to make sure you grab the right device that you're looking at. Like I have an Apple connector here. So I want to go to my Ethernet adapter. Now I have Wi-Fi as well. So you're not going to have to worry about this too much because my Wi-Fi is going to sit in one network and my Ethernet adapter is going to sit on a different network. If you're working on a company laptop, they may not allow what's called multi-homing. That means that as soon as you connect your Ethernet connection, it's going to shut down your Wi-Fi connection or vice versa. That's okay. You don't need to have internet access for this. I need to have internet access for this because I'm also recording and online and those kind of things, but you don't have to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my Ethernet connection and it's going to bring me up a status window. I'm going to go to Properties and I'm going to go to IPv4 or Internet Protocol version 4. I'm going to double click here and I'm going to add in an address. Now you'll see it's already in here from testing, but you're going to put in 192.168.1 and any number other than 5. I just happen to put 10 here. You could put any address that is not 5 in here as long as it's a 192.168.1 network address. The other thing we're going to do is put a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Once you have that in, you don't need to worry about DNS. We're not going to go out to the internet. We're not doing any of that stuff. So we're plugged in directly from our laptop to our Ethernet interface 1 on our core appliance. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to say OK again, and I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go ahead and open up my browser where we went to downloads, and I'm going to boot up our appliance. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to do my rocker. You'll hear it boot up, and it's going to take a couple of minutes here for the system to completely boot up. If you wanted to see that boot up, you could have left your console cable and you would have seen it go through that boot process, but it's not really important that we do that. We just need to give it a little bit of time to actually boot. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new tab and I'm going to go to HTTPS and two colons, and I'm going to go to the default address that's on my box. So I'm going to say 192.168.1.5. Now, .5 is your default IP address. The first thing that I'm going to go to in that, when we're looking at that, when we start doing a setup, is I want to change that wizard and admin password. So I'm going to check and make sure that my port 8000 is available. Now, it may take a few minutes for the system to fully boot up before that happens. But whenever it boots up, your port 8000 is going to be available first before your port on 443 is available. So we're going to go ahead and check port 8000 first. It looks like our port 8000 is up. I'm going to go to advanced and we can proceed. And now you'll see that we have our Tenable Core login. This is where you would start in the beginning with your wizard and admin and do the setup like what you've seen in other videos. Once this is done, I'm also going to check and make sure that my setup wizard is ready. So I'm going to say 192.168.1.5, and then I'm just going to hit enter. All right, we put our HTTPS in the beginning. It looks now like that 443 is open. I'm going to go to advanced. I'm going to say proceed, and you'll see we're also at our setup wizard. So hopefully this has helped, that this videos have been helping you. If it does, please hit that like button, give me a thumbs up. We're really close to our 100 subscriber mark. And if you can hit that subscribe, that would be wonderful and you'll get updates. I know it's been a little while since I've done an update. One of the things that took a little while to get a hold of an appliance, that took a little bit of running around. I'm actually in the middle of a move right now too. So I'm moving from literally from one state to another. I'll continue to try to keep these up to date. There is a release coming out for Tenable on 319. When we hit 319, I'm going to do a whole coverage of everything that's changed. It's a pretty big update, and we'll be able to go from there. So until next time, have a wonderful day. Please leave comments below if this has been helpful or if you have questions, and we'll talk to you soon.